Thank you, Tony. 6 minutes then. Okay, quickly, 1 minute. I'm going to start by briefly reflecting on that post-Cold War moment when the US was, I think, for perhaps nearly a couple of decades, the dominant world power. I'm talking about the so-called that moment when the US and its Western allies, usually under the auspices of NATO or the blue hats of UN, staged grandstanding interventions in the former Yugoslavia and then the Middle East and so on, and of course in Afghanistan. Now, because I think what was striking about that post-Cold War moment was just how disoriented I think Western elites were by the sudden collapse of the USSR. The disappearance, I think, of communism had deprived Western elites of a sense of who they were. And so they began using foreign policy making almost as a means to sort of find a purpose, to demonstrate a purpose, to try to solve that kind of Western identity crisis, to demonstrate a sense of moral purpose to a domestic audience. They were saying effectively, look at us bringing democracy, say, to Iraq, look at us protecting the Libyan people from a terrible dictator. This is what we as the West stand for, and this is what we are against. Now, not only did this kind of geopolitical posturing, and I think it was probably more posturing than anything else, given the kind of lack of strategic thinking behind it, not only did this sort of fail to provide Western elites with the identity and purpose they craved, it also destabilized various parts of the world and sowed the seeds of conflict, I think, which were to erupt as the West's economic and military strength started to decline and the unipolar world started to give way to our current sort of more multipolar world, a world, that is, in which Russia, China and others are seeking to establish a new balance of power. Now, this is where we are at now, in the throes of a shifting world order, a shifting balance of power. And it will, I think, almost undoubtedly cause conflict. It already is, largely because the would-be emergent powers are pushing up against and challenging that post-Cold War world order. We've seen this already in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which pushes back against the western borders of NATO and the EU. And we're seeing conflict hotting up with China, of course, not just over Taiwan, but over atolls and shoals in the South China Sea. And of course, there's the conflagration slowly enveloping the Middle East. Now, this growing geopolitical disorder has certainly left Western nations painfully exposed militarily. European nations are lacking the military capacity, I think, not only to support Ukraine at the moment, but also for their own self-defense. Just take one example, the British Army. It's now down to 70,000 troops, which is reportedly the smallest it's been since the Napoleonic era. But I think what we're seeing is more than a problem of military logistics and low levels of defence spending. It is a symptom, I'm sure other people on the panel will reiterate, it's a symptom of a much deeper problem. In some ways, the same problem, I think, that underpinned the humanitarian militarism of that older unipolar moment during the 1990s. And that's the problem, named that Western elites have no real sense of what it is that they should stand for. If anything, I think it's even more pronounced now. This identity crisis is even more pronounced even more pronounced than it used to be. I think today's elites don't value the accomplishments of Western modernity, of liberty, democracy, or indeed perhaps even the nation-state itself. And as a result, they have no real sense of what it is, I think, that's worth defending. No sense of what it is that is worth fighting for. In fact, it's probably even worse than that. I think too many amongst our sort of ruling elites, they seem to actively loathe the things that are worth fighting for. A very small sort of case in point is a leaked internal document from the British Army in 2019, which I was just reading about last week. In this document, higher-ups were told to regard soldiers describing themselves as patriots or talking of national identity. They were told to regard these people as potential extremists. That's right, British officialdom was seeking to purge the British Army of the very people that think their country is worth fighting for, which I think sounds more than a little counterproductive. And there are countless other examples, true of the West's, for want of a better word, West's woke military complex, from Joe Biden telling his diplomatic corps to advance LGBTQ rights in 2021, to the UK Ministry of Defence urging staff to display their pronouns in their bios. And I think this loss of a sense of what it is that is worth defending in the West and about the West, the lack of this kind of active turn against what is valued about the West, this rot has spread from the head down There are now large sections, I think, of Western publics, especially among the younger university-educated cohorts, who believe they know exactly. Thank you, Tony. Know exactly what the West is, and they absolutely hate it. I think from their kind of alternately identitarian and environmentalist perspective, the West is white, oppressive, and the source of the climate catastrophe. Many are more likely, I think, to side geopolitically with the West's foes than with Western nations themselves. I know there are a few readings for this session suggesting ministries of defense need to meet these youngish sort of professional activists in their own terms. I think the idea that you could forge a kind of patriotic militia from Black Lives Matter and Just Stop All activists seems more than a little fanciful. So I think for the West, indeed for Western nation states themselves, the fight to define and defend the West is well and truly on. But this fight is not to be fought and won abroad, as Western elites of the post-Cold War moment mistakenly thought. I think the fight to define and defend the West begins at home.
Thank you very much, Tim.